The document is 97 pages long. It was written in 1954, classified top secret on the day it was completed, and locked inside the Central Intelligence Agency's archives for the next 60 years. It was called, internally, Clandestine Service History, Overthrow of Premier Mossadegh of Iran, November 1952 to August 1953. The author was a CIA officer named Donald Wilbur. He had been there. He knew what had happened. He wrote it all down. In 2013, 60 years after it was written, the document was declassified. Historians and journalists who had been requesting it for decades finally received copies. They read it carefully. They found, in the CIA's own language, this assessment, written by the Americans who ran the operation, about the operation they had run, that what had been done to the government of Iran in August of 1953 was, and here the document used a specific phrase that should be read slowly, a painfully shameful operation. Their words, not an editorial, not a retrospective judgment. The CIA's own account, written in 1954, of what the CIA had done in 1953. Right now, in the spring of 2026, the United States and Israel are conducting military strikes on Iranian nuclear and military infrastructure. The headlines are about enriched uranium, about ballistic missile programs, about the Islamic Republic's supreme leader declaring that his enemies will not see victory. The framing, across most of Western media, is that Iran is an aggressive theocratic state whose hostility to the United States and Israel is a feature of its ideology. Something inherent, something permanent, something that exists because of what Iran is. That framing is incomplete. Not wrong about Iran's current government's positions and behavior. Those are documented. Wrong about where those positions came from. Wrong about when the hostility began. Wrong about who specifically produced the conditions for it. The answer is in that document. The 97-page classified history that the CIA kept secret for 60 years, and then, when it finally became public, received approximately 48 hours of news coverage before disappearing again from Western consciousness. This is the story of what it says, and of what it made. 1951, Tehran. The city is alive with something that has not been felt here for a generation. Political excitement. The specific kind that comes when a democracy is actually working, when elections have produced an outcome the population wanted, when the government is doing what the people asked it to do. The parliament is full. The newspapers are full. The streets are full of people discussing, in the cafes, in the bazaars, and the university courtyards, what is about to happen. His name was Mohammad Mossadegh. He was 69 years old, elected prime minister in April of 1951 by a parliament that was responding to an overwhelming public mood. He came from an aristocratic family, had studied law in France and Switzerland, held a doctorate in law from the University of Neuchâtel, had served in Iranian politics for 4 decades. He was not a revolutionary. He was a constitutionalist, a man who believed in the Iranian parliament, in the rule of law, in democratic governance as the only legitimate form of authority. He was also the man who nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. On the 1st of May, 1951, the Iranian parliament, the Majlis, voted to transfer the assets of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company to the National-Iranian Oil Company. The vote was nearly unanimous. The gallery was full. Outside the building, Tehran's streets were packed. The nationalization of Iranian oil was not a sudden radicalization. It was the culmination of a debate that had been building in Iranian public life for 2 decades. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, the AIOC, had been operating in Iran since 1901, under a concession signed when Britain was an imperial power and Iran was a weakened state that had almost no leverage in the negotiation. By 1950, the AIOC controlled the largest oil refinery in the world at Abadan. It extracted Iranian oil, refined it, shipped it, and sold it. It employed approximately 70,000 Iranian workers. The profit split was, by any contemporary measure, remarkable. In 1950, the AIOC paid Iran approximately £16 million in royalties. The AIOC's annual profits from Iranian oil were approximately £170 million. The British government collected more in income taxes from the AIOC than Iran collected in royalties from its own oil. This was not a secret. These were the published figures. Mossadegh's argument was not complicated. He made it repeatedly in parliament, in court, in international forums. The oil is Iranian. It was extracted by Iranian labor from Iranian ground. A fair arrangement would return a fair portion of its value to Iran. The 1901 concession was not a fair arrangement. It was the product of imperial pressure. A democratic government of a sovereign country was entitled to renegotiate it. If renegotiation was refused, nationalization was the legal and democratic alternative. The British government's response was to describe Mossadegh's position as an outrage. They organized an international boycott of Iranian oil. They withdrew AIOC's British technicians, leaving the refinery facilities non-functional. They froze Iranian financial assets in British banks. They took the case to the International Court of Justice in The Hague, where Mossadegh went personally to argue Iran's case and won. The court ruled it had no jurisdiction over what was, the court said, an internal Iranian matter. The British, having lost at the International Court, turned to the Americans. Their argument was that Mossadegh's government was too unstable to survive the economic pressure they were applying, and that the resulting vacuum would be filled by the communist Tudeh party, which would deliver Iran into the Soviet sphere. The argument had a specific advantage. It was the Cold War, and the Americans were listening for exactly this kind of threat. It also had a specific problem. The CIA's own analysts, reviewing the evidence in 1952 and 1953, concluded, internally in classified assessments, that Mossadegh was not a communist, had no intention of delivering Iran to the Soviets, and that the Tudeh party's influence in his government was limited. The communist threat to Iran was, in the CIA's own internal assessment, overstated. Alan Dulles, the director of Central Intelligence, was told this. His brother John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State, was told this. President Eisenhower was briefed on the fuller picture. In March of 1953, Eisenhower gave his authorization. Operation Ajax was approved. The budget was set. $60,000. Kermit Roosevelt Jr. was 36 years old. He was a Harvard graduate, a veteran of the OSS during the Second World War, and the grandson of Theodore Roosevelt. He was the CIA's chief of Middle East operations. He crossed into Iran from Turkey in late July of 1953, traveling under a false identity, carrying no documentation that connected him to the United States government, and carrying in his operational budget enough money to change the history of a country. The operation worked like this. Roosevelt set up a safe house in northern Tehran. He met, in secret, with a small group of Iranian military officers who were loyal to the Shah and willing to act. He worked through intermediaries to pay newspaper editors to print stories portraying Mossadegh as a communist agent. He funded religious figures to condemn Mossadegh from the pulpit. He organized and paid street mobs to create chaos in Tehran's center. Mobs that posed as supporters of the communist Tudeh party, committing acts of violence that would be attributed to Mossadegh's supporters and used as justification for military action. The CIA called this part of the operation black propaganda. The term is accurate. The communists committing violence in Tehran's streets in August of 1953 were not communists. They were paid actors. The scenario they were performing, the communist destabilization of Iran's democracy, was the justification for removing the democracy. On the 15th of August, 1953, the Shah signed the royal decrees dismissing Mossadegh as prime minister. A military officer was sent to deliver them. Mossadegh refused to accept them. The officer was arrested. The Shah fled to Rome. The CIA sent a cable to Washington reporting that the operation had failed entirely and should be abandoned immediately. 4 days later, on the 19th of August, Roosevelt tried again. This time, the street mobs were larger, better organized, and better paid. The military officers Roosevelt had been cultivating acted decisively. The headquarters of the National Front and Mossadegh's own residence were surrounded. By afternoon, the coup was complete. Mossadegh surrendered. He was 71 years old. He had spent 40 years in Iranian public life. He had won a democratic election, nationalized his country's oil through a parliamentary vote, and defended that nationalization before the International Court of Justice. He was arrested at his home, tried for treason against a monarch he had served under a constitution that gave the prime minister the authority to govern, and sentenced to 3 years in solitary confinement. After his sentence was served, he was transferred to house arrest at his home in Ahmedabad. He was not permitted to leave. He was not permitted to speak publicly. He was not permitted to participate in the political life of the country he had tried to govern. He remained under house arrest for the rest of his life.
Operation Ajax.
Mohammad Mossadegh died on the 5th of March, 1967. He was 84 years old. He had spent the last 14 years of his life in the same house, in the same garden, permitted to see a small number of visitors, not permitted to leave. The Shah attended no ceremony for him. The Iranian government issued no official statement. He was buried quietly. His house is still there. It is now a museum. Every year, Iranians visit it. What Mossadegh had built in the 2 years and 4 months of his government deserves to be named specifically, because it is what was destroyed, and because understanding what was destroyed is the only way to understand what replaced it. His government had a free press. It had an independent judiciary. It had a civilian-controlled military. It had free elections. It had a prime minister who wept openly in parliament, who held press conferences in his pajamas for theatrical effect, who insisted on behaving as if the public were the authority his government served, because in his view of Iranian constitutional democracy, they were. It was, by every documented measure, a functioning parliamentary democracy in a region and an era in which functioning parliamentary democracies were not common. The CIA's classified history, written in 1954, assessed that what had been accomplished in August of 1953 was strategically necessary and operationally successful. It also described it, in a phrase that took 60 years to become public, as painfully shameful. Both assessments appear in the same document. The Shah returned from Rome. The American ambassador in Tehran organized a reception for him. Eisenhower sent a telegram of congratulations. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company's assets were not returned. A compromise was negotiated in which a consortium of Western oil companies, including several American corporations, took over Iranian oil operations, with Iran receiving 50% of the profits. 50%, not the 16% the AIOC had been paying. It only took the removal of a democracy to get there. Here is what $60,000 purchased in Tehran in August of 1953. It purchased a man named Kermit Roosevelt in a safe house in northern Tehran. It purchased the services of a mob-for-hire operation run by two brothers named Shaban Jafari, known in Tehran as Shaban the Brainless, who had been on the CIA's payroll for 6 months before the coup. It purchased newspaper stories that did not happen and communist riots that were not communist. It purchased the restoration of Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi to effective power in a country he had fled 10 days earlier. The return on investment, as economic analyses go, was extraordinary. For a sum roughly equivalent, in today's dollars, to the asking price of a modest one-bedroom apartment in a mid-tier American city, the United States acquired a compliant client state controlling one of the world's largest oil reserves, secured British oil interests, and stabilized, from the American strategic perspective, its Cold War position in the Middle East. What it also purchased, though this was not on the operational ledger, was 26 years of Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, and a secret police apparatus trained in part by the CIA and the Israeli Mossad that systematically destroyed every secular democratic opposition movement in Iran for a generation. The students who marched against the Shah in 1978 were, on average, 23 years old. They had been born after the coup. What they had not been born into was any functioning secular democratic alternative. Savak had seen to that. The only organized political force in Iran that had survived 25 years of repression was the religious establishment. In January of 1979, the Shah left Iran. He would never return. Among the millions who voted for the Islamic Republic in the referendum of March 1979, there were engineers and professors and doctors and students and shopkeepers who were not Islamists. They voted for the Islamic Republic because it was the only organized alternative to the Shah. They voted for it because anything aligned with the United States had, in their lived experience, ended the way Mossadegh had ended. The Islamic Republic that replaced the Shah was not the natural expression of Iranian culture. It was the political consequence of the systematic destruction of every secular alternative. This is the link that most Western accounts of the 1979 revolution leave out.
You understand now what most don't.
You now understand something that most people watching the same headlines you're watching have never been told. The documented chain that produced the current US-Iran confrontation starts not with the Islamic Republic's ideology. It starts with a 97-page classified document that the CIA kept secret for 60 years. If you want to follow the rest of this chain, the hostage crisis, the Iran-Iraq war, the nuclear standoff, subscribe to this channel. We document what doesn't make the headlines. New episodes every week. Because the room behind the headline is never what you expect. The hostage crisis of 1979 that broke US-Iran diplomacy was conducted by students who stormed a building that had housed, 26 years earlier, the operation that destroyed their parents' democracy. The rupture that followed, the closure of diplomatic relations, the economic sanctions, the designation of Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism became institutional. And with every subsequent escalation, something kept happening that nobody in Washington seemed to want to examine. The pressure consistently strengthened the hardliners and weakened the moderates. The nuclear program that is now the subject of military strikes was developed, documented decision by documented decision, as the chain from 1953 extended into its 7th decade. Iran had watched what happened to governments without deterrence. They concluded the lesson. The document is 97 pages long. You can read it now. It took 60 years for it to become public. In those 60 years, a democratic government was replaced by a theocratic one. A Cold War proxy became a permanent adversary. A region found no stable accommodation. And now, there are airstrikes. There is a building in Ahmedabad, about 90 kilometers from Tehran. It is a modest country house with a walled garden. Mossadegh lived there for 14 years under house arrest and died there in 1967. Every year, Iranians make the trip. They stand in the garden. They understand what was taken from that house and from this country. And they know, in the way that populations know these things when they are not hidden from them, exactly how it was taken and by whom. The chain is complete. You can see all of it now.